Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Camp and Lewis, and it is September 4th. I'm here, of course, with William Green and my friend Dimitri over in France. And I want to say that a quick introduction is that, Dimitri and I have been chatting for a while now. He is Mr. Fake Name over on Orchid board. And one day he emailed me or messaged me and said, "Hey, your sound is okay, but I can help." And it got me thinking about the sound in my YouTube videos as, it's sort of an afterthought, at least it was for me, until I started speaking with Dimitri. And then he really focused my sort of attention on microphone and editing, and he helped me through it. In fact, he was even taking the videos and doing sound production things on his end and then sending them back to me. So we've been chatting for well over a year now, I think. Um,
Yeah,
and
about a year and a half, maybe, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And Dimitri, you're sort of a lot of your focus for your orchid growing is Phalaenopsis and species Phalaenopsis. So
Mhm.
I'll let you introduce yourself and chat about yourself and your background in orchids.
Yeah, sure. So as Steve said, I'm French. I'm about 27, so fairly young for the orchid business, without throwing shade at you guys. I've been
We were
growing,
27 once.
Yeah, I mean I'm 28 now, so I get
Mm.
it.
yeah, I've been growing orchids for about 15 years, I think. Bit more, a bit less probably, and with a focus on Phalaenopsis for about 10 years. I actually found old pics dating back to 2013. So yeah, about 10 years. I've decided to focus on species because that's what's easily available here in Europe. You guys have a lot of Catasetum and Cattleya, but it's not really a thing here. Whereas Phalaenopsis are really available mostly from German retailers. So I've decided to really try to understand them, grow them, and like a lot of people, starting from the basic hybrids that you find everywhere, and then chatting with people and going to conventions and all that kind of stuff. And I vividly remember the first species I saw. It was Phalaenopsis berlina, that is favored by a lot of people for its beauty, like the name implies, and also the scent. And the owner of that berlina was actually there at the show, and we had a talk together, and he really sold them to me. So I think that's how it started. And I went from the easy to find species like Phalacia or like Schilleriana that you can find pretty much everywhere to the more specific plants like Maculata or like Lowii that most people have never heard of. So without saying I'm professional, I think I tried and failed successfully, like most of us. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. It's like how I envision my care about Phalaenopsis.
Yeah, and so both you and William grow primarily indoors.
Mhm.
And so what is
You
your
can see behind me.
Yeah, so is that your primary growth space or
Um, it was for a while, and then like a lot of people, I suffer from acquisition syndrome, right? I try to put them a bit everywhere in the house and where there's enough light for them. And I actually have a driveway here, so I can put some plants outside during the cold season, during the hot season. So I try to have different grow areas and divide them into working areas for their specific needs. So yeah, primarily indoors growers.
cool.
I want to know what the guy at the Orchid Show told you that sold you on the Phalaenopsis.
Or was it
Do you
just the scent?
remember?
Did he just jam it into
Oh,
your
it
nose?
was
That is a lot.
um it was at the show in France that is Bordeaux. I don't know if you've been there. You've been to France like a couple of times, William, I think.
Yeah, I was there just last month, actually.
Nice. Yeah, to Britain, Saint-Malo, and these kind of places.
Yeah, it was great. But Bordeaux's down south, right?
Yeah, it's about the middle of the country on the west. So there's a big orchid show there, but it's not just people selling. It's there's a part that's inside a greenhouse, you could say, a conservatory, and people have set their plants there. And it was that gigantic Bellina, but the like 10, 15 years old plant. So massive leaves, like this big, and tons of spikes, tons of flowers. And the thing was just, I think it was the smell that really drew my attention first. If you've ever smelled the Phalaenopsis bellina, you'll know that it's unmistakable. And I was not familiar with species at the time, so obviously strike my attention. And when exhibitors show their plants, they have like tags showing their names and who grows the plant. And I was looking at this plant for a while, and there's that guy that popped in and started chatting with me. And it turned out that he's a super famous collector in France and grower who's now retired. And he was talking about his experience as a grower and how it's like in Borneo and where this plant lives and all kinds of super interesting details about his adventures and growing career, really. And I was fascinated because when you're buying a plant in a store, you're just minding about your own business, I guess, in a way. But when you have this renowned guy who's been all over the world and tells you super interesting stories about places you've never imagined, it's really a glimpse into the forest, the Bornean forest. So I think it's really where it started. And
So
then I started reading a bit more about these plants, about their care, about where they come from, and a rabbit hole, really.
yeah, how are you able to sort of jump into recreating the Bornean forest at your place? And I mean, I assume you bought a Bellina that day, right?
Probably not that day, but I've bought a couple and I've killed a couple as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people want Bellina and a lot of people struggle with them. Um, Maybe we'll talk about it in further details when we talk about what recommended species and what hard species there are. I don't really remember what I bought. I think Phalaenopsis javanica, I'm certainly sure of it, and Cornucervi probably.
Mhm.
So those are fairly unique species compared to the hybrid run-of-the-mill, like supermarket run-of-the-mill hybrid.
So, so what are some of the differences? I think most folks, a lot of folks, they think of Phalaenopsis, they think of like, what you said, the grocery store or at their here in the U.S., Home Depot and Lowe's sell a lot of those, and that's kind of their whole perception of Phalaenopsis. These sort of large, round, white,
Mm-hmm.
maybe some color in the lip, but that's about it. But there's a whole color palette out there that um, once you kind of start. I mean, Bellina is very different. Ludimagnon is very different, and as I was at Tam Miami last year, you're like, I was sending you pictures, and you're like, dude, you got to get some of those, and you twisted my arm a little bit, and I'm glad you did because I brought home some, or I brought
Pretty
home
cool
one.
species, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and there's some really cool ones out there, but yeah. So what are some of the species that you really like growing under your indoor conditions?
There are currently, if I'm not mistaken, about 71 species. And I think the most common assumption that people have regarding Phalaenopsis is that they all come from like from the Philippines, from Borneo, but actually they range from the Himalayas down to northern Australia. So it's a fairly large area. And there's not just the big showy plants with erect spikes and lots of flowers that you can typically see. Those are made a lot from the same species that belong to the Phalaenopsis subgenus of Phalaenopsis. So it would be Phalaenopsis amabilis, Phalaenopsis schwartiana. Sorry, Latin is a bit weird sometimes. Phalaenopsis schilleriana. Those plants that really show these big flowers with some hair on the lip. But you have a lot of different species in a lot of different conditions, like Phalaenopsis lobii. I think I sent you a picture of this one for editing. I do have it here. It's not in bloom at the moment, unfortunately. But as you can see, it's a tiny little thing.
Is that mature?
Yep, it has
Wow.
bloomed, and it had a pod not too long ago. It's mature.
That's really cool.
And this one comes from temperate. Oh, I'm gonna need you guys' help.
Temperate?
Temperate forests.
Yeah.
Temperate
A little
forest.
colder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people think usually of area of distributions in 3D, in 2D, right? There's latitude, there's longitude, but a lot of these places are mountainous and have subtropical and temperate forests. So you have some Phalaenopsis that actually encounter near frost in their habitat. And lately, there's been a lot of hybrids that were made from other species than these big showy flowers one, mostly the novelty hybrids. Those were made from few species like Embornensis or Bellina or Venosa for the yellow backgrounds. You have also the Zebrina, Phalaenopsis zebrina, that looks pretty nice with a yellow background and some purple and red striping. And more hybrids are made from these ones. And these are called usually the summer bloomers. So you have, instead of the big round flowers, you have the star-shaped flowers that can keep going and going year after year as the plant keep their spikes. But yeah, there's a lot of different hybrids. You also have the small one, the super tiny ones that you will usually find. And these are made from usually Ecastris or Javanica or Celebensis. So yeah, out of those 70 or so species, you see the same ones being used often in hybridization.
I was going to say one of the more popular hybrids that I just tend to see on social media in recent years that I've never seen in person is the mini mark.
Mm-hmm.
And I just looked it up, and it's 25% labii and 25% maculata, two species that, like you said, we hardly ever see. Yeah. The point being, this was a really, really, really popular hybrid, and two of the parents are super, super unusual.
Yeah, it's really from that. Sorry, Steve.
That small one. That's why, I mean, mini mark is a small stature plant with small flowers, and it's really cool looking.
When I saw the labii, I was like, that looks like mini mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. You have some, obviously, like doing successful hybridization is very hard because you have to think about recessive and dominant traits. But you have a very cool trait that maculata has, that is the red lip. And you see a lot of these hybrids that are purposely made to keep the red lip. And really something that I find is quite unique in this way.
And mini mark has some spots on the petals and sepals, if I'm not mistaken, right? Where does that come from? Do you
Yeah, it comes from the maculata as well.
Maculata, okay.
But the lip of the mini mark takes more from labii.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the flower is Ecastris. And this is where you really start getting a bit into complex things with percentages. And you see that Ecastris tends to make super long spikes with lots of flowers, and labii only makes a couple flowers. And this is why there's they try to get as much influence from Equestris as possible, because Minimark really blooms a lot from lots of different spikes and lots from lots of flowers in those spikes.
And which is, I recall seeing online a couple of times, when people think of Phalaenopsis, they think of growing in the shade, which is mostly true, right? But there's that one that's kind of terrestrial, and it can be really bright conditions, and it has that long erect spike, but it's a small plant. Which one is that? Is that
I think you're referring to Phalaenopsis, not Marmorata, Pulcherima.
Yes, yeah, that's right. It used to be Doritis, right?
Doritis or something.
It used to be, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of plants that get lumped into Phalaenopsis and out of Phalaenopsis. I can show you one plant. This is a seedling from, if I'm not mistaken, it's called Phalaenopsis, and I forgot the name, obviously. Well, I'll Google it. It used to be another genus.
Oh,
It
there's
was lumped into Phalaenopsis.
Ceterea.
Nope. But it's now part of the same group. Yes, Ceterea is now a Phalaenopsis. Phalaenopsis hygrochyla.
Oh, okay.
So you had Hygrocylus, you had Ceterea, japonica, and these take more from Venda than from Phalaenopsis, really, but they were lumped into Phalaenopsis. So you end up with a big mishmash of different species that have different care and different needs and different habitat, all under the generic name of Phalaenopsis, which can be really source of confusion for newcomers into this genus. So if you can tell, it really has this very grows towards the top and has erect part, and the leaves are super fleshy, which is not really something that you see typically in Phalaenopsis.
So how many years do you think that one will stay in Phalaenopsis before someone splits it out?
I really don't know, because more species have been lumped into this subgenus as well.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Which subgenus is that? I feel like some of those, like, when they start lumping things in, there's sort of like a subgenus a lot of time that's sort of a catch-all, right? It's just like, we don't know what it is, so we're just gonna throw it in.
Like Polychilus.
Yeah.
I think it's from subgenus Subpariciae.
Okay.
I'll check. Nope. It's in the section Hygrocylus. And you have 5 species in there.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a bit to be grown more like a Venda than a Phalaenopsis, really. And to bounce back on what you said about shade and full sun, I think it's common knowledge that Phalaenopsis grow in the shade. But where people get caught on a bit is that shade in your apartment is going to be different from the shade in Borneo, right?
Right.
So you see a lot of Phalaenopsis are shade plants. Phalaenopsis are shade plants. Yes, they are, but what they experience in their environment is not going to be the same if you put them in 50% shade in your apartment. So when we grow indoors or even under our latitudes in greenhouses like you, Steve, it's a good practice to push the light as far as they can go without giving them full sun. But a lot of people struggle with Bellina or Gigantea, for that matter, because they don't give them enough light. And then this is where bacterial or fungal problems start to arise. So it's important to keep in mind that light really fluctuates around the world, and do not take shade for obscurity, really.
And tailor the lighting to the individual species or the background of the hybrid that you've got.
Exactly, yes. You have quite a few species that will tell you if the light levels are correct, because they will have purple roots or purple markings on the leaves. Like Schelleriana, for instance, is famous for this. It will really start to turn purple as a whole plant when it gets a lot of light. And this is where you want to go. This is good for your plant.
Yeah. And have either of you guys burned plants under lights? It's not
Under
really...
lights, no, but if I show you a hybrid,
Yeah.
this is for reference one of those tiny hybrids that you can buy, but quite grown up.
Get big.
Much bigger.
You can see that the leaves, it's a bit buried. The leaves are a bit thick, and then they get progressively narrow. And these super long and narrow leaves are from this summer, because it grows outside and it gets a lot of reflected light from the walls that are white. So is it burnt? No, but you can see that it's starting to get a bit spindly, so it's a show that it gets well enough light.
Mm-hmm.
And plants under lights or outside will start to get elongated like this when they get a lot of light.
So are we looking for our leaves to be long, light, and thinner? Is that what we want, or do we want something in between the fatter leaf and this?
Something in between. This is an Equestris hybrid, so it doesn't really matter anyway.
Okay.
It's pretty tough plant, and Equestris has very spindly leaves, and I think that it has the most narrow leaves in the genus.
Oh, wow.
But if I take this Phalaenopsis over here, Adowariensis, you can see that the leaves are much thicker.
Yeah, it's almost succulent.
Almost, yes. It's part of it's in the same complex as Gigantea is. So in this instance, you don't really want it to be any narrower. If I compare it to a Gigantea again.
And both of those are really nicely grown.
They're beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
But
I tried.
those are tricky, right? Those are not easy Phalaenopsis from the grocery store type of Phalaenopsis, right?
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. They're not hard. They're not impossible. You have a lot of people that will tell you, no, don't grow this, don't try this. You will end up killing it in your apartment. But to come back to the light issue, it really shows this plant. I just have right under the lights, but like really close to the light, and it looks pretty happy to me.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people that will like criminally give them a very low amount of light, and then they will be like, it's not growing, it's not spiking, it has tons of bacterial issues. It's not that the plant is hard to grow, it's that you're not giving it the right care.
Right.
So I think temperatures are a factor, obviously, but the most important thing to keep in mind when growing Phalaenopsis is to push the light as far as it will go, because this is what will give you the best results. The healthier leaves, the more roots, more flowers, more everything, really.
And that seems to be the opposite of what the general idea, like you said, is Phalaenopsis. Oh, no, keep it far away from the light, right? And then suddenly everyone's having problems.
It's that common misconception, because if they grow in the shade in the forest doesn't mean it will grow in the shade in your apartment. It's really not the same thing.
The forest is still very bright.
Yeah, if you go walk in the forest and you have a sunny day and just walk into a clearing and have that overcast shadow, this is what you want. You don't want shade in your apartment. So you have to keep it very bright and as bright as possible, but without giving them sun.
Maybe instead of shade, you could say filtered light. Filtered
as bright as you can, really. That's this thing to keep from this.
Do you think that's the most commonly sort of misrepresented or the most common mistake that people have with Phalaenopsis? growing Phalaenopsis successfully is giving it brighter light than what they think of as shade?
I think so, yes, because they will tolerate low light. They will grow and not thrive, but they will survive in low light. But this is really, I'm gonna repeat myself, but this is really where problems start to arise. And if you have a weakened plant because it cannot photosynthesize correctly, then obviously it's gonna pick up on everything, every disease, every bacteria, every problem that might come around your house. If you have a weakened plant, then it's just gonna be easier for it to die and it will not thrive. And when you couple this low light thing with bad temperatures or improper fertilization, yeah, then it's just a recipe for disaster.
As someone who doesn't really have any Phalaenopsis except for the big grocery store one that someone gave me a couple years ago, I'm particularly interested in what you were saying earlier about Bellina. Bellina is super popular. Everybody wants to grow it. Do you think you could give us some tips on how to grow Bellina successfully? Or maybe what people tend to do wrong and then what they should be doing?
What people tend to do wrong, it's the same thing again. If you want to grow a plant successfully, I think it's the same with Catasetum or Cattleya, right? If you want to grow it successfully, you have to understand the plant. Popular supermarket hybrids are designed to be bulletproof. They're designed to grow fast, to bloom strong, to be hard to kill. But when you start growing into the species, then it gets a bit more complicated because the genetic of the plant is narrower. You have to respect the plant and try to understand what it wants. And also, I think you guys were talking about this in the previous chat, that if you select the plant that will survive in 3 or 4 generations, you will have a super strong plant. But it's hard to find good strains when you buy species. It's hard to really get this genetic that is narrowed down. So it's easier to kill species than it is to kill hybrids. And for Bellina in particular, when you try to understand where the plant lives, it comes from Borneo, it comes from the forest where it's always humid, where it's almost always hot. It comes from very high in a canopy, so it gets a ton of light. My Bellina is in there, but the leaves are super thick, almost thicker than the Gigantea, which means that it's a plant that is able to withstand pretty extreme conditions, can experience drought, it can experience super hot sun. And people usually grow them a bit too cold and without enough light. Because when you're right under the canopy in the Bornean forest, obviously you get a lot of light.
Yeah, a lot of light, a lot of heat, a lot of humidity.
It's not impossible to grow in your house, but
it takes some tailoring.
Exactly, yeah. You have to
work on your
look at your plants and try to see what works, what doesn't work. We all have killed a lot of plants to get where we are and try to grasp what's bad when we look at our plants. It's still not something a beginner can do, but start reading and understanding where your plant is going from. And yeah, go from literature, go from people who can successfully grow the species and what they're doing wrong. You have a lot of people that just buy a ton of plants and then are like, why is it not working?
Yeah. So Zoom's telling me we got about less than a minute. So I guess before we jump off, is there, William, do you have any last questions that we can wrap up in about 40 seconds?
I'm good. I appreciate the tips. I'm definitely interested. Maybe if I find some space, I might try with another Schilleriana one of these days.
Yeah, it was a bit short and
it's so nice. Schilleriana foliage is just amazing.
And it smells absolutely wonderful as well.
Yeah. All right, you guys, I'm gonna wrap this up because it's gonna end soon.
Thanks, Dimitri.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to see you both. And we'll chat again soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.